I am Cyrus, son of Cambyses, grandson of the man destiny could not destroy. I was born under the shadow of fear, not for what I had done, but for what I was foretold to do. They said my birth would bring the fall of a king and the rise of an empire, even before I took my first breath. A prophecy had already written my fate. My mother, Mandane, was the daughter of the powerful king of the Medes, a man feared across the lands of the East. One night, Astyages dreamed that a great river flowed from her womb and flooded his kingdom, covering every mountain and valley. The wise men of Ecbatana, priests, seers, and magi gathered to interpret the vision. Their words terrified him. Your daughter's child will overthrow you. Your blood will be replaced by his. Astyages, obsessed with power, did what kings often do when fate frightens them. He tried to change it. He married my mother not to a prince, but to a lesser Persian ruler, my father Cambyses, hoping that such a union would humble her offspring. But fate does not bow to kings. When I was born in the royal house of Anshan, news of my birth reached Astyages, and his fear ignited again. He sent for me at once. I was taken from my mother's trembling arms, wrapped in royal cloth, and brought to the palace of There, in the silence of night, my grandfather looked upon the child who would one day end his reign. To ensure that day never came, he summoned his trusted general Harpagus, a man known for loyalty and reason. Take this child, Astyages ordered, and end his life before he takes mine. Harpagus accepted. But as he held me in his arms, something inside him resisted. Perhaps it was pity. Perhaps the gods whispered in his ear. He could not bring himself to kill a helpless infant, so he gave me to a royal herdsman named Mithridates and his wife, Spacco, who lived among the mountain pastures. To hide the deed, Harpagus ordered them to leave me to die in the wilderness. But when Mithridates' wife saw me, her heart broke. That same day, her own newborn child had died. She looked upon me and said, "The gods have taken my son, and sent this one in his place." She nursed me as her own, giving me the name Agridates, and I grew up believing I was the son of a shepherd. The mountains became my kingdom, the sky my crown. I learned early that life was a test of endurance. The Median winters were cruel, the summers unforgiving. But the shepherd's life taught me strength, humility, and the language of the common people, the very people I would one day rule when I was 10 years old. Destiny came knocking again. During a village game, I was chosen by the other children to play the king. I took the role seriously, commanding, punishing, rewarding, until one boy, the son of a nobleman, disobeyed my orders. I punished him as a king would. When the boy's father complained to Astyages himself, I was brought before the throne. I still remember that moment, the marble floor cold beneath my feet, the smell of incense thick in the air. The king stared at me for a long time, his eyes narrowing. He asked who I was, who my parents were, and why I acted with such royal confidence. My words were simple. We were playing a game, my lord. They made me king, and I ruled as a king should. Astyages saw something in me he could not explain, a familiarity, a presence. He noticed the shape of my face, the curve of my eyes, the reflection of his own daughter in me. Suspicion grew, and he summoned the herdsman Mithridates. Under fear of death, the truth was confessed. The boy before him was indeed the child he had ordered to die. Rage consumed Astyages. He called for Harpagus, demanding to know why the order had not been carried out. Harpagus, trembling, told him the truth. Astyages pretended forgiveness, but kings rarely forgive treachery. Days later, he invited Harpagus to a royal feast. At the height of the celebration, Astyages revealed his revenge. The meal before Harpagus had been made from the flesh of his own son. When the horror was unveiled, Harpagas's face turned pale, but he did not scream. He looked into the eyes of his king and said only, "As the king wills, so it is done." But vengeance is a patient flame. Harpagus would one day return this cruelty. Ahundredfold. As for me, Astyages, haunted by guilt or superstition, could no longer harm me. He sent me back to Persia to live under my father, Cambyses I, the ruler of Anshan. I was free, and my true life began. In the land of Persia, I was no longer a shepherd's boy. I was the prince of a proud and ancient people. We Persians were vassals of the Medes, servants in their empire, burdened by tribute and humiliation. But our hearts burned with silent defiance. We were mountain men, warriors, and herdsmen, forged in hardship. The Medes ruled by fear. The Persians endured by faith. My father taught me to rule with restraint. He said, "Power earned through blood fades. Power earned through loyalty endures." From him I learned justice. From my mother, wisdom. From my years in hiding, humility. But the vision within me, the one that drove me, came from somewhere higher. I began to dream of something greater than vengeance. I dreamed of a kingdom where different peoples could live, not as slaves, but as citizens, where the strong protected the weak, and rulers were servants of the law. That dream, I knew, would demand rebellion. As I grew to manhood, whispers of my destiny spread through the Persian tribes. They saw in me something more than a prince, a man chosen by the gods. And then came Harpagus, the same man who once saved my life and lost his son because of it. He came to me quietly, bearing the weight of years and the fire of revenge. "The time has come," he said. "The Medes are weak. Their king is old and cruel. The nobles hate him. The army obeys him out of fear, not love. Lead the Persians, Cyrus. Lead them, and I will deliver the Medes to you." I felt the pull of destiny, the echo of that ancient prophecy. The grandson would indeed overthrow the grandfather. But I did not rise for vengeance alone. I rose because my people deserved freedom. I began uniting the tribes of Persia, Pasargadae, Marathi, and Maspi, not through fear, but through promise. I swore that in the empire I would build, no man would be judged by blood or birth, but by loyalty and courage. The Persians rallied to my cause. We trained in the mountains, forged alliances, and built an army of men who fought not for gold, but for faith in a new order. When Astyages heard of my uprising, he laughed. "The boy I once spared thinks himself a king." He gathered his armies and sent them south, led by his own general, Harpagus. But fate is not without irony. Harpagus turned against his master. The Median soldiers, tired of Astyages' cruelty, joined me. The battle of Pasargadae was swift and decisive. When it was over, the banners of Persia stood over the tents of Media. I entered Ecbatana not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. They brought Astyages before me, old, defeated, but still proud. The courtiers waited for my vengeance. Instead, I rose from my throne and approached him. He looked at me and said, "So it has come to this. The gods were right." I bowed my head. "Grandfather," I said, "your reign ends, but your blood does not. You gave me life, and I will not take yours." In that moment, the prophecy was fulfilled, not by hate, but by mercy. The Medes and Persians were now one. From that unity, I built the first pillar of what would become the Achaemenid Empire, an empire that stretched farther than any before it. But at that moment, standing before the man who once sought my death, I felt no triumph, only peace. The child of prophecy had become the king of destiny. When I look back on those early years, I see not the hand of gods, but the chain of choices that shaped me. The shepherd's son who learned compassion, the prince who learned justice, the rebel who learned restraint. I am Cyrus, born to a prophecy, tested by betrayal, and chosen not to destroy, but to unite. My story had just begun. I remember the smell of dust that morning, dry, sharp, and alive with the breath of horses. The Persian hills stood silent, waiting for me to decide the fate of two nations. I was no longer the shepherd's son or the lost prince. I was Cyrus, king of a people who had never known freedom, and standing before me was the empire that once claimed to own us, the empire of the Medes. The years after my return from Ecbatana were years of quiet preparation. My father, Cambyses I, ruled Anshan, a small Persian kingdom under Median rule. He was a wise man, cautious, diplomatic, perhaps too cautious for the storm that destiny was gathering. I watched him bow to Astyages' envoys, paying tribute in gold and horses, sending our best men to serve in Median armies. It was the price of peace, but peace paid in humiliation is only another form of slavery. When my father grew old and his strength waned, he called me to his side. He said, "My son, I have ruled with patience. You will rule with courage. But never forget, courage without mercy is tyranny." He died soon after, and with his passing, the people looked to me. That day, I did not crown myself with gold or jewels. I took a simple iron circlet, forged by a blacksmith from our village, and placed it upon my head. "This," I said, "is not the crown of a conqueror. It is the burden of a shepherd, for I am the shepherd of Persia." Under my rule, Persia began to awaken. The Medes thought of us as their inferiors, mountain men, simple farmers, and herders. But I knew the truth. Hardship breeds strength, and obedience hides defiance. The Persian tribes, Pasargadae, Masbi, all waited for a leader who could speak to their hearts. Not their fears, so I went to them, not as a king demanding allegiance, but as a brother sharing a vision. I said to them, "The Medes rule by birth. We will rule by worth. The Medes command by fear. We will lead by justice. The Medes take from all. We will build for all." They swore loyalty not to a throne, but to an idea. And that idea, unity, was more powerful than any army Astyages could raise. But rebellion is a dangerous whisper. It spreads quickly and draws the ears of kings in Ecbatana. Astyages heard the rumors that the grandson he once tried to kill was now uniting the Persian tribes. He laughed at first, calling me the shepherd boy with delusions of grandeur. But laughter fades when it echoes in fear. So he summoned his court and prepared for war. His general, the same man who once saved my life, Harpagus, stood before him. Years had passed since the night Astyages fed him his own son's flesh. That memory burned colder than any steel. When Astyages ordered Harpagus to lead the Median army against me, fate smiled again, for he was sending his own destruction to command his forces. I knew Harpagus would come, But I also knew he would not come as an enemy. He sent me secret messages, written on strips of leather hidden inside the belly of a hunted hare, carried by loyal hunters who risked their lives to cross the Median border. The message was simple. The army you face is yours already. March without fear. We prepared. Our weapons were crude compared to the Medes' bronze and iron, but our hearts were not bound by fear or greed. We fought for something far greater, our own right to live free. When the Median army entered the valley near Persian, I rode at the head of my men. The morning sun caught the dust rising from thousands of hooves, a golden mist that turned the battlefield into a dream. Across the field, the banners of Media waved, the lion of Ecbatana roaring against the rising falcon of Persia. I raised my spear and said, "Remember why we fight. Not to destroy, but to reclaim. Not to avenge, but to awaken." The battle began. The Medes had more men, better armor, stronger weapons. But when the trumpets sounded, something strange happened. Their lines faltered. Officers hesitated. Orders were delayed. And then, from the heart of their ranks, came the first defection, 100 men. Then 1,000 turned their spears away from us. They shouted my name, Cyrus, Cyrus, until the field shook with it. The army of Media was unraveling from within. When Harpagus himself rode forward, I knew the prophecy had come full circle. He dismounted, drew his sword, and knelt. "The gods are just," he said. "What was taken from me is repaid in full." The soldiers behind him followed. What began as rebellion became victory. That night, Ecbatana, the capital of the Medes, fell without a siege. The gates opened not to conquerors, but to brothers. I entered the city on horseback, surrounded by torches that lit the sky like 1,000 stars. There was no plunder, no burning, no slaughter. The people expected vengeance, but I had seen too much of vengeance to trust it. I went straight to the palace, where Astyages waited. He was old now, his once black hair turned to silver. When I entered, he looked at me long, his eyes filled not with hatred, but with exhaustion. He said, "So it ends. The gods were right. You were meant to take what I could not keep." I bowed before him. "Grandfather," I said, "you sought to kill me, and yet I stand here offering you life. Your rule ends, but your name will not be shamed. Rest in peace, for your blood still flows in mine." I spared him, not from weakness, but from understanding. He was a king born in fear, ruling through it. I would be something else. From that day on, I swore that no man would die because of the accident of birth. If I was to rule, it would not be through terror, but through law and respect. In the years that followed, I began building something the world had never seen, a kingdom not of subjects, but of nations. The Medes became partners to the Persians, their generals, my generals, their craftsmen, my builders, their priests, my advisors. Where others would destroy, I chose to blend. The Median capital, Ecbatana, remained one of my royal cities. Their language, their art, their traditions, I preserved them all, for I had learned early that unity cannot be forced by the sword. It must be nurtured by wisdom. The conquest of Media was more than victory, it was transformation. From it, the Achaemenid Empire was born, and though the world would one day call it the Persian Empire, I knew it was built on the fusion of two great peoples, the strength of Persia and the discipline of Media. I reorganized the land, creating councils, armies, and a system of governance where loyalty was earned by fairness, not fear. I rewarded those who once served Alcibiades for loyalty. Even to a fallen king is still loyalty. My closest ally, Harpagus, became one of my greatest generals. Under his command, we would soon face new horizons, the lands of Lydia and Babylon. But those are stories for another time. Sometimes, when I walked through the halls of Ecbatana, I would pass the throne where Astyages once sat. I never placed myself upon it. Instead, I kept it empty, a silent reminder of what pride and fear can destroy. The people called me Shahanshah, King of Kings, but I never saw myself as their master. I was their guardian, their builder, their voice, and in that role I found peace. Years later, I stood again in the mountains where I had once been a shepherd. The same wind blew across the valleys, carrying with it the scent of wild thyme and freedom. Below me stretched a land no longer divided by chains of tribute or walls of fear. For the first time, Persia stood united, and I, its humble servant, stood ready to face the world. I am Cyrus, born of prophecy, raised by fate, guided by mercy. I learned that a king's greatest power is not the sword in his hand, but the truth in his heart. And it was that truth, not conquest, not revenge, that turned a mountain boy into the founder of an empire. When the Medes bowed their banners before me, I did not celebrate. Victory is a quiet teacher. It whispers warnings more than praise. For I knew that power gained too swiftly can vanish just as easily. The Medes were strong, but beyond their lands lay kingdoms far wealthier, prouder, and older than any in Persia. And the first of them to rise against me was the kingdom of Lydia, ruled by a man whose name glittered with gold. Croesus was the richest king alive. His palaces at Sardis shone with marble and gold. His stables overflowed with horses. His treasuries could ransom nations. He believed that wealth was power, that gold could buy loyalty, and loyalty could buy immortality. But no amount of gold can silence the voice of ambition. When word reached him that I had overthrown Astyages, his old ally and brother, he saw an opportunity wrapped in vengeance. Cyrus, he said to his court, is but a youth who toppled an old man's throne. I will crush him before he learns the weight of a crown. And so Croesus began gathering allies, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and even the Spartans from across the sea. They promised to unite against me, the rising power from the east. But promises made across oceans are as fragile as the wind. Before he marched, Croesus sought the guidance of the oracle at Delphi, that ancient temple where kings came to ask the gods their destiny. He sent golden gifts and asked, if I cross the river Halys and go to war with Persia, what will happen? The oracle replied, if you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire. Croesus smiled, blind to the truth. He never imagined that the empire destroyed would be his own. When his armies crossed the Halys River, the ancient border between Lydia and Media, my scouts brought word to me. I remember standing in the council tent at Ecbatana, the map of the West spread before us. The scent of oil lamps and parchment thick in the air. My generals spoke of caution to fortify, to delay, to wait until the alliance of our enemies dissolved. But Harpagus, ever the realist, turned to me and said, Cyrus, hesitation is the language of fear. The Medes followed you because you acted when others doubted. Strike now, before Croesus believes the gods truly favor him. He was right. We marched west through the mountains of Armenia, our soldiers enduring bitter cold and endless stone. Yet their hearts were unbroken, for they knew they followed not a tyrant, but a vision. We carried no plunder, only resolve. When we reached Tyria on the borders of Cappadocia, we found Croesus waiting. His army glittered in the sun, iron helmets, bronze shields, chariots creaking under the weight of armor and arrogance. Behind them, the plains shimmered with tents embroidered in gold thread. He had come not just to fight, but to display the Battle of Tyria was fierce. From dawn until the setting sun, the clash of metal echoed across the fields. The Lydians charged with fury, their chariots slicing through our front lines, but we held our ground. I rode among my men, dust covering my face, shouting until my voice broke, "Stand fast. A king's courage is nothing without the courage of his soldiers." By nightfall, neither side had claimed victory. Croesus withdrew, confident that winter would protect him. He believed I would retreat, as most armies did in the snows of Anatolia. He disbanded his troops and returned to Sardis to await spring, certain that the Persians would need months to recover. But I had learned from the shepherd's life, the mountain knows no winter that the heart cannot endure. I ordered my army to march through the cold. We crossed frozen rivers, climbed ridges where the wind cut like blades, and descended upon the plains before Sardis, before Croesus could even summon his men. When his scouts brought him news of our arrival, he thought it a dream. By the time he gathered his army, the battle had already begun. Croesus deployed his cavalry, proud Lydian horsemen with gleaming armor and white plumes. They were his pride, his strongest weapon. But among my ranks were warriors from Media who knew a secret. Horses fear the smell and sight of camels' darts so. I ordered the front line to be formed of camels, their humps towering above men, their smell thick and wild. As the Lydian cavalry charged, their horses panicked, rearing and scattering in chaos. Our infantry advanced behind them, cutting through the disordered ranks like fire through dry grass. The Battle of Thymbra ended before sunset. Croesus fled to Sardis, his army broken, his confidence shattered. The siege lasted only 14 days. The walls of Sardis were high, but not higher than human folly. One of my soldiers noticed a Lydian guard drop his helmet while patrolling the ramparts, then climbed down a hidden path to retrieve it. That night, our men scaled the same path. By dawn, the gates of Sardis were open. Croesus, the richest man on earth, was my prisoner. I found him standing in the ruins of his palace, once filled with laughter and music, now silent except for the wind. He looked upon me not with fear, but with strange calm. He said, "I was told that if I crossed the river, I would destroy a great empire. The oracle was right, it was mine. I could have killed him. Kings before me would have burned him alive as a warning to others. But I saw no glory in cruelty. Croesus was a man blinded by wealth, not malice. And so I spared him as I had spared As. I kept him near me as an advisor, and in time, he became one of my most trusted counselors. Even in defeat, wisdom can be found. After Sardis fell, the cities of Asia Minor, from Ionia to Phrygia, opened their gates to me. Some did so in fear, others in hope. I treated each not as a conquest, but as a pact to the Greeks of Ionia. I said, "I am not your enemy, unless you make yourselves one. Serve in peace, and you will prosper." Some refused, trusting their distant allies in Sparta and Athens. But distance is no shield against destiny. In time, even they would understand that the rule of Cyrus was not bondage, it was order, as the western horizon settled under Persian rule. I stood atop the citadel of Sardis, and looked toward the setting sun. Beyond it lay the sea, endless, unknowable, untamable. I wondered if any king could ever rule something so vast. But I also knew that empires are not built by conquering lands. They are built by winning hearts. So I sent messengers to every city, proclaiming a simple decree. All nations under my rule shall keep their gods, their customs, and their laws. Let no man be forced to worship what he does not believe. Let no city lose its name or its pride. That was my victory, not gold, not slaves, not spoils, but unity through respect. Years later, when the first visited Sardis again, Croesus walked beside me through the restored gardens of his palace. He said quietly, "You have conquered the world, Cyrus, but what will you do with it?" I smiled. "I will not own the world, Croesus. I will hold it in trust until the next man worthy of it arrives." He nodded, and for the first time I saw peace in his eyes. When the world remembers me, it often recalls the wars, the banners, the blood, the victories. But I remember faces: the soldier who carried water for a wounded enemy, the farmer who welcomed my army without fear, the foreign priest who thanked me for sparing his temple. Those moments are the true empire I built, one not of land, but of humanity. I am Cyrus, the shepherd who became a king, the conqueror who chose mercy, the ruler who learned that even the richest man can lose everything except his name. And mine, the world would remember. I had conquered the east and the west, but the heart of the world still beat in Babylon. It was not merely a city, it was a symbol. Its walls were said to touch the sky, its temples older than memory, its people proud and unbending. Whoever ruled Babylon ruled the world, and I knew that until Babylon opened its gates to Persia. My empire was unfinished. Babylon was ruled by Nabonidus, a man who called himself chosen by the moon god's Sin, yet neglected the gods of his own people. He had abandoned the capital for years, leaving his son Belshazzar to rule in his place. The priests resented him, the soldiers mistrusted him, and the merchants whispered that the old glory of Babylon was fading. Across the empire's edges, the people cried for relief, not from hunger, but from prideful kings who had forgotten how to listen. So when I looked westward, toward the Euphrates, I did not see a war of ambition. I saw a mission of balance, to restore order where arrogance had sown decay. I began by sending envoys, not soldiers. I promised the cities along Babylon's frontier that those who surrendered would be spared, their gods untouched, their laws preserved. In return, they would recognize me as king of the lands, a title not taken, but granted by the will of their people. It worked. One by one, Babylon's outer provinces welcomed us, Opis, Sippa, and others along the northern river. They had grown weary of Nabonidus's absence and Belshazzar's excess. While my army advanced, I made certain the world heard not of invasion, but of liberation. Yet Babylon itself was a fortress unlike any other. The city stood within colossal walls, nearly 100 feet high, and so thick that chariots could race atop them. The Euphrates River flowed directly through its heart, its waters guarded by bronze gates and watchtowers. A direct assault would have been suicide. To defeat Babylon, I had to think like Babylon, patient, clever, and silent. As my armies encamped near Opis, Belshazzar gathered his forces to stop us. He believed that the gods of the city would protect him. The Battle of Opis was swift and decisive. My soldiers, Persians, Medes, and allies from across the empire, fought with discipline and precision. We outflanked their chariots and drove them into the river's edge. When the dust cleared, Babylon's northern army was destroyed. I ordered that the city's civilians be spared. My commanders expected plunder. I forbade it. Let the people see, I told them, that Persia comes not to burn, but to build. That mercy broke more walls than iron ever could. A few days later, Sippar opened its gates without resistance. There we captured Nabonidus himself, the last king of Babylon before me. I ordered that he be unharmed. He was weary, more priest than warrior, and his eyes held the confusion of a man whose guards had grown silent. I sent him under guard, but treated him with dignity. There was no victory in humiliating an old man who had already lost everything. With Sippar secure, the road to Babylon lay open. Belshazzar still commanded the city, and he trusted in its walls. The Euphrates, broad and deep, ran straight through it, feeding canals that made the city nearly impregnable. No siege could outlast its grain stores, and no ladder could scale its fortifications. But water, I knew, was both strength and weakness. South of the city, my engineers and I studied the river by torchlight. We saw where the Euphrates split into shallow tributaries, old channels that had long since dried. I ordered them cleared, widened, and fortified. Then, on a moonless night, we did what no king had dared. We diverted the river itself. Thousands of men worked in silence, their feet sinking into the mud, their bodies slick with sweat and dust. As the water level dropped, the once mighty Euphrates turned into a slow, shallow stream that could be crossed on foot. At my command, 2 divisions of soldiers marched through the dry riverbed, one from the north, one from the south. Inside Babylon, the guards had grown careless. It was a festival night. Music filled the air, torches burned low, and no one imagined that the enemy stood already within their gates. We entered through the river's path and advanced through the darkness. By dawn, the city's towers bore my banners. There had been almost no bloodshed. The people awoke not to the sound of battle, but to the announcement that Cyrus, king of Anshan and Persia, had entered Babylon as ruler chosen by Marduk, their own god, to restore peace. When I walked through the processional way, past the blue bricks of the Ishtar gate, adorned with lions and dragons, I saw fear in the faces of the priests. I stopped before the temple of Marduk and ordered that offerings be made in his name. The priests stared in disbelief. A conqueror who honored their god instead of destroying his temple, such a thing had never happened. I told them, "Your faith is your own. I do not come to steal it, but to protect it." That day, the people of Babylon hailed me not as an invader, but as a restorer. To secure their loyalty, I released the captives taken by Nabonidus's wars. Among them were many nations, Akkadians, Sumerians, Jews, and others who had been carried into Babylon in chains. I allowed them to return to their homelands, taking their sacred images and treasures with them. I ordered this decree to be inscribed on clay and buried in the foundation of the city, a record for the future. That tablet is what men now call the Cyrus cylinder. It says, "I am Cyrus, king of the world, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad. I returned the gods to their shrines and restored all peoples to their homes." But what it truly meant was this: power does not endure through fear. It endures through justice. From the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, nations now stood under one banner. The merchants of Lydia traded with the craftsmen of Susa. The farmers of Bactria sent grain to the temples of Babylon. Never before had so many peoples lived under one law, one system, one peace. But I did not rule through iron. I ruled through trust. Every satrap I appointed swore loyalty not to my throne, but to the order it represented. Each land kept its language, its gods, its customs. That was my design, not an empire of conquest, but an empire of coexistence. In the months after Babylon's fall, I remained within its walls, studying its systems, restoring its canals, meeting its scholars and priests. From them, I learned how to weave the administration of the old with the energy of the new. I rebuilt the empire not as a conqueror, but as an architect. Even the defeated came to see that Persia's strength lay not only in its armies, but in its fairness. One evening, I climbed the tower of Etemenanki, the great ziggurat dedicated to Marduk. From its summit, I looked over the sprawling city, below the gardens, the canals, the temples glittering in the fading sun. It was then I understood that true kingship was not measured by the number of cities taken, but by how gently one could hold them once taken. Babylon had fallen not because its walls were weak, but because its leaders had forgotten to serve their people. I swore I would not repeat that mistake. Years later, when I left the city to return east, the people lined the roads and blessed my name. They did not see me as a conqueror, but as a restorer of balance, a man who had made the world wider, yet more peaceful even now. When I close my eyes, I can still hear the quiet flow of the Euphrates beneath Babylon's gates, the same river that once guarded the city and later carried my army to victory. It reminds me that strength is not found in walls or weapons, but in the wisdom to turn obstacles into pathways. I am Cyrus, the king of justice, the builder of an empire, not of slaves, but of equals. And though Babylon's towers have long since fallen, the idea that I built there, that kings must serve their people, not own them, endures still. When I look back upon my life, I see not the battles or the crowns, but the road that led me from a shepherd's tent to the throne of empires. And yet, even a king who commands half the world cannot command time. The years after Babylon were years of peace, the kind of peace a man waits his whole life to earn. The roads were safe, the markets alive, and the people of every land, Median, Lydian, Babylonian, Persian, lived under one law, not one whip. I spent my days building, not conquering. From Susa to Ecbatana, I strengthened the empire with justice, not fear. Each province had its own governor, its own freedom of worship, its own pride. And yet, though the empire was at rest, I was not. A soldier's heart, once awakened, never truly sleeps. Beyond our eastern frontier lay the lands of the Masojite nomads who rode with the wind and slept beneath the stars. They were fierce and untamed, masters of the steppe, and they answered to no throne. Their queen was Tamiris, a woman as fearless as any general I had ever faced. My advisors urged caution. They said, "Great king, you have united the world. Why chase ghosts in the desert?" But I remembered my youth, how the Medes once called me the same, a ghost of the hills, a name without weight. And I thought, perhaps the same fire that had lifted me now burned in them. If I did not move against them, they might one day move against us. And so, when spring returned, I gathered my army once more. We crossed the Oxus River, the Jackson, as some call it, and built a bridge of boats to carry our men and horses across. The wind there was dry and sharp. The plains stretched forever, with no shade, no walls, no end. The Masojite watched from afar, always retreating, never engaging. I knew that wars on open land are not won by speed, but by patience. So I devised a plan to draw them out. I ordered a rich camp to be left behind, filled with gold, wine, and food, as if we had fled in haste. It was bait, and it worked. Tamiris's son, Spargapises, led a force to attack the camp. They found no soldiers, only the lure of abundance. They feasted, they drank, and when the sun rose, my men fell upon them. Many were killed. Spargapises was captured alive. When they brought him before me, I saw not an enemy, but a youth, proud, desperate, burning with the same fire I once carried when I defied Astyages. I spoke gently. You are a prince. You fought bravely. Tell your mother that war serves no one but the grave. But pride runs deep in royal blood. When he realized his mistake, Spargapises asked for freedom. I granted it. He drew his sword and ended his life before my eyes. When the news reached Tamiris, her grief turned to fury. Her army came like a storm, endless, wild and merciless. They struck at dawn when the mist still hung over the plain. Our formation broke under their sheer number. The steppe swallowed the sound of commands. The air filled with dust and cries. I rode into the center to rally my men. Stand, I shouted. If we fall here, the empire we built will fall with us. But the gods had decided otherwise. An arrow pierced my thigh, then a spear struck my side. The world tilted, the sound of battle fading into wind. I fell from my horse, and the earth met me like an old friend. They carried me away as the army withdrew across the river. The wounds burned like fire, yet my thoughts were calm. Pain is fleeting, only purpose endures. Harpagus knelt beside me, his armor stained with dust. He said, Great king, the men are still fighting. Shall I order them to return? I shook my head. No, Harpagus. Enough blood has been spilled to feed every god in heaven. Tell them to go home. He lowered his eyes, and for the first time I saw tears on his face. Cyrus, he said softly, you gave the world to Persia. What shall we tell them when you are gone? I smiled. Tell them that I was only a man, one who tried to be just. They carried me back across the Oxus. Each step of the march felt like the closing of a book. The rivers I had crossed, the cities I had freed, the crowns I had taken, all drifted away like dust in sunlight in my mind. I saw again the shepherd's hills of Anshan, where my mother once wrapped me in wool and told me that greatness is not in birth, but in heart. I saw the face of Croesus, who taught me that wisdom can survive defeat. I saw the towers of Babylon rising like dreams from the earth, and I thought perhaps the true conquest was never of men, but of myself. When we reached Persia, my city of peace, I asked to be carried to the gardens. The air was heavy with the scent of cypress and stone. There, beneath the open sky, I saw the small house of stone that I had ordered built long ago. My tomb, it was plain and simple. No gold, no statues, no armies of the dead. Only this inscription carved upon it, O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come, I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire. Do not grudge me this little earth that covers my body. I chose those words myself. They were not written for kings, but for strangers, for anyone who might stand there one day and wonder what kind of man I was. As the light faded, I felt no fear. I had seen empires rise and crumble, kings crowned and slain. But justice, that fragile, invisible thing, had endured wherever I planted it. My sons would inherit the world I had built, but not its burden. That belonged to me, and it ended here. I closed my eyes, And in the silence, I heard again the whisper of the wind across the plains, the same wind that had carried my first cry, the same wind that would carry my name, not as a god, not as a tyrant, but as a man who learned that mercy outlives might. I am Cyrus, born of a shepherd's son, buried beneath a king's sky, and remembered not for what I conquered, but for what I chose to spare.